That's right, we're not talking about one, not two, but 3 consecutive days of Final Fantasy news and discussion, and that is pretty dang amazing. This might as well just be a Final Fantasy channel at this point. Hi, I'm Bradley Overrated. You might remember me from nothing because I'm not a very popular YouTuber, but thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this, and let's discuss the big news that's recently dropped that Final Fantasy as a franchise has now totaled over 200 million units total, and that number is both impressive and kind of lower than I thought Final Fantasy would be at this point. So let's talk about this now. And it seems to me, from what I could gather, that it is the franchise as a whole, which means it includes all of the side games, from games like Final Fantasy Tactics to World of Final Fantasy. I would assume the Theater Rhythm games, that new Chocobo Racing one, the Chocobo Mystery Dungeon games. I mean, there's a lot of Final Fantasy games outside of the mainline entries, but those games don't typically sell that well, and I understand that. What does still surprise me, though, is considering that there are so many Final Fantasy games that have 10 plus million units sold. Games like Final Fantasy X, Final Fantasy VIII, yes, 8 sold over 10 million. Final Fantasy XIV, which I think has sold over 20 million. And when you consider all of these, mainline entries and all of the spin-offs and the fact that Final Fantasy has been around for 30-something years, it sounds like an impressive number, but I feel like it should be higher than that. You know what I'm saying? Especially when you consider that I just talked about how Final Fantasy the Pixel Remaster Collection has sold 5 million units on its own, and that's impressive. I think the bigger drawback here is I just also did a video about Final Fantasy 16 only selling supposedly at least only 3.5 million units, and that is a super low number. I mean, we're talking very low. Final Fantasy 15, for example, has sold almost 5 times that amount of units. So yeah, it was a very disappointing, I think, sales number for Square Enix there. But all the same, I'm happy to hear that it's crossed that 200 million threshold. I'm just a little bit surprised it took 16 mainline entry Final Fantasy games plus the dozens of spin-off titles to get to that number. And it kind of makes me wonder what it is going to take for Final Fantasy to get back up into that 20 million, 10 plus million mark for a mainline entry. So Final Fantasy 17, I would hope, would be able to hit 15 million units. I just don't know if it's going to anymore. And what makes this even worse is, Square Enix could be looking at this and see that Pixel Remaster Collection knocking on 5 million units and go, do we even need to do this now? Especially since apparently also Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, that big old remake that's cost them lots and lots of money, also was lower on the sales numbers than they were hoping it would be. So it's just kind of this interesting situation that Final Fantasy is in, where their mainline entries aren't doing so well, but the remasters seem to be doing better. And maybe that'll encourage, Square Enix to do another remake. I've heard grumblings of Final Fantasy IX getting a remake, which I'm all about. If 8 was to get one, I'd be okay with it. If even 6 was to get one, I'd be okay with it. But at the same time, Final Fantasy 17, I want it to be very successful. I want it to do ballpark numbers of 15, 20 million units, because the more people that get a chance to try Final Fantasy, the more people that will just perhaps go back and play some of the originals. But if they played some of the originals, they might be taken a little bit off guard. If your first game, for example, in the Final Fantasy franchise was 16 or 15 or will be 17, just think how crazy it would be for them to go back and check out Final Fantasy VI. It would feel, and it would just straight up be very, very different. So Final Fantasy's in this interesting position where I think they're trying to find their identity and trying to find what is going to capture the main target audience, which is kind of everybody. Because back in the late 90s, when 7, 8, 9, and 10 were all right then and there, Final Fantasy was kind of at its peak in popularity. And even with games like Final Fantasy 12 and 13, those also sold extremely well. So there was definitely a decade or so between 99 and 2009, if you will, where Final Fantasy was just synonymous with gaming, and it still is, but then that was when it was at its top of the top. And now, it seems to be stuttering a little bit. But at the same time, like I said, I think it could definitely rebound. It's just a matter of trying to figure out what it is that the audience wants. And the audience is kind of split and torn in a lot of different directions. A lot of people want turn-based Final Fantasy. A lot of people are absolutely fine with action Final Fantasy. Someone like me, I'm fine with both of them. I just want them to be cohesive and have traditional things that Final Fantasy games have always had. You know, I want to see proper summons, and I want status effects in my fights. I want to be able to play as multiple members. And I know that sounds like I'm digging at Final Fantasy 16, but I think if they took the formula of 16 and applied it to 17 and just had these simple things like this, it would feel amazing. You know what I'm saying? It would just feel like the next evolution for Final Fantasy. And I do love that this franchise has been so willing to experiment a lot with their own formula. It's one of the reasons I really respect Final Fantasy. Not every single thing they do is going to immediately be a big hit for me necessarily, but I still respect that they're always willing to try and experiment and keep things feeling fresh. It's what makes Final Fantasy special, and it's probably the reason why it has been able to sell 200 million units. But as always, I'd like to pass a question off to you guys. What do you think about the sales numbers of the Final Fantasy franchise hitting 200 million units? Let me know in the comments down below. Do you like these numbers? Do you not like these numbers? And how much do you love Final Fantasy? If the answer is an 8 out of 10, a 9 out of 10, maybe it's your favorite franchise of all time, that right there is probably the correct answer. And as always, I will see you on the next one. I am Bradley Overrated, out like a trout. Praise be to Yevon, and take care, guys. Bye-bye.